experience and government level, NCCU, also across Asia, Middle East, Latin America, and East and West Africa. Dr. Rubens holds a doctorate in security and risk management from University of Portsmouth. Writing his thesis on alternative command and control framework for strategic management and critical decision making in complex crisis environments. Dr. Rubens specializes in the management of hyper-complex systems associated with city management and critical national infrastructures. He established the ICRM in 2018, which is now recognized as a serious institute in the global strategic risk crisis management community, with 35 international chapters, over 30 academic institutes in the whole world. Please, Dr. Rubens.
Thank you. Thank you, Igor. I'm going to stand up because then I feel I have a connection to this room, if that's okay. Igor, thank you for that. I'd like to thank Professor Anatoly Manichenko for inviting me here today. And I'd like to thank you for taking time, those of you who are here in the room, and those of you who are listening online, to take time to take part in this, what I hope will be a discussion. So here we are, my friends, 16th of November, 2022. And there is a question which we are all asking ourselves. Does anybody know what the hell is going on? Because in my opinion, the answer is no. And if anybody says, yes, I know what the hell is going on, you have to leave the room because you've clearly misunderstood the nature of the question. So what I would like to do over the next hour or so is to talk about some of the issues that we as a community are facing in terms of thinking about strategic risk and crisis management, let's say in a period of 2022 to 2025, that 3-year period. So if we're looking at future horizon scanning, I think 2022 to 2025 is a reasonable time frame. And then we can do distance horizon scanning 2025 to 2030. After 2030, nobody has any idea what the hell is going on. So there's no point. And the truth of the matter is that if we look at the issues and the challenges and the problems that we will be facing in 2025 to 2030, they don't exist yet. And certainly the solutions that we will be bringing do not exist yet. So what I would like to do is to see if we can take this chaotic world that we're living in today and in some way put a structure and a framework around it. There is the development of a new concept within academia, which is the pracademic. And the pracademic is the person who mixes practitioner experience with academic discipline and insight. Now, if we traditionally look at strategic risk and crisis management, we tend to find people who have been soldiers or policemen in that sort of thing. They have an expertise. And they then are given responsibility within their organizations to understand and model and prepare for the challenges we're facing. What the Americans would call left of bang, that is left of bang, that is before something happens. Then you have bang, then you have right of bang, the response. But we are giving those responsibilities to people who are left of bang, to people who have personal experience. They have experience as soldiers, they have experience as commanders, they have experiences as teachers. And so what I've been involved in, and many of the people on the staff here have been involved in for the last 30 years, is to try and persuade those people that as people coming from the academic world, we have something of value to offer. that we can bring something of value to the game. And so we will go to the risk managers and the crisis managers, and this 30-year-old experienced soldier or this 30-year experienced policeman. And we will say, we would like to discuss crisis management with you. And they will say, who the hell are you? And they will say, have you ever stood in the river at 2 o'clock in the morning when the floods are coming down and you have to move 2,000 people in the next 40 minutes? Have you ever done that? You say, no, I've never done that. And I say, in that case, you have nothing, nothing to say because you don't know my life. You have nothing of value to bring to the game. Now, if we are going to bring something to the game, we have to accept that challenge. We have to say, okay, that is a good point you've made. I will now engage with that and I will bring some value. We will discuss it, so I will bring some value. And the point that we as academics bring to the game is this. My friend, I absolutely recognize the value that you bring to your role. I recognize the experience you have. I recognize the insight you have. I recognize the ability and capability you have. And I absolutely recognize and trust and respect your capability. And if you say to me, David, take your people and move now and move fast, I will move now and I will move fast. And if you say to me, David, don't worry, stay, we've got another 12 hours, I will stay. I will not question you. I will absolutely accept and respect your capability. But there is a problem. What happens if you're not there? What happens if you're not there? If you're not there because you're on a plane, or because you're stuck in traffic, or your phone doesn't work, or you're on another project, what happens if you're not there? Your value is zero because you are not there. And the other problem is this. I absolutely trust that you will make the right decision, and I will put my life in your hands. The problem is, you can't tell me why you made that decision. If I want to understand why you made that decision, I have to live your life for 30 years. And maybe I can learn it in 20 years, but I have to live your life. Because that capability is based on your own personal experience and insight. But that is not the same as organizational capability. It's individual. We take the individual out, there is zero value. So what we look at today is the fact that when we look at strategic risk and crisis management, which might be climate change, or it might be pollution, or it might be poverty, or it might be infrastructure fragility, or it might be hyper-urbanization, all of these issues, and global warming, all of these issues which are serious, and which are having an impact on our lives already, and which will affect the way that you will live your lives over the next 30 years, absolutely. But the question is, how do we move on one side, if you look at, for example, COP26 last year, COP27 right now in Cairo, G20 happening in Bali. What we see as the outcome of those meetings is policy, strategy, objectives, aspiration. That's just words. That's words. That's nothing. We've had policy and we've had strategy, we've had objectives for 30 years. But what we need to do, and I hope that's what some of you will spend your life doing, is to move to the other side of the equation. And what is on the other side of the equation? On one side of the equation is aspiration and policy and strategy, but on the other side of the equation are three things: influence, impact, legacy. And if we now start moving to influence, impact, and legacy, then we are making a difference. There is a wonderful phrase in English. I know that most of you speak beautiful English, certainly better than my Ukrainian, but There's a wonderful phrase in English, with all due respect. And what happens in English, if you say with all due respect, what's going to happen is everybody's going to step back because you're about to attack somebody. You're about to be very, very rude to somebody. So that's what you say before you're very rude. We have that in academia as well. We have that phrase in academia. So in academia, if there's a professor giving a presentation, and you say, Professor Smith or Professor Dimitri, thank you for your presentation. That was a brilliant, brilliant presentation. What I mean is, you agree with what I think. That's basically what it says in academia. If I say it's a brilliant presentation, it's you agree with what I think. The opposite of that is, Professor Dimitri, thank you for your presentation. Interesting theory. And if we say interesting theory, basically we mean, my friend, what have you been smoking? Seriously, I mean, are you crazy? But interesting theory is just a jab. Then we've got to knock them out. And we say, my friend, Professor Dimitri, thank you for your lecture. Interesting theory. I'm not sure where I see the impact is. Where is the impact? And basically what you're saying is, who cares? Who cares? You've written your book, you've done your lecture, you've given your presentation. Where is the impact? And so what I think that we should be having as a community is the aspiration to say that we should bring something of value to this table and to the community we're working in, and we should be able to bring three things: influence, impact, and legacy. And if we wish to bridge those two things, on one side aspiration and strategy and ambition, and on the other side we have impact and influence and legacy, then we have to bring the bridge. And in my opinion, what is the bridge? Structure and methodology. Structure and methodology. Structure and methodologies, and this is how we do it. This is the roadmap. This is the framework. This is how we can move from aspiration to impact, influence, and legacy. And it seems to me that the responsibility that we have as a community is to fulfill that duty, that role of creating structure and methodology which makes sense within the terms of those discussions. And that, it seems to me, that in a wide strategic perspective, on today, the 16th of November 2022, that is a challenge that we as an academic community working in the world today bring to the table. Basically speaking, what we consider as modern strategic risk and crisis management, has a very clear starting date. September the 11th, 2001, 9/11. Everything before 9/11 was ancient history. It was a simpler, older, simpler times. And suddenly, on 9/11, everything changed. But if we look at the language that we use, and as you grow older, you'll understand that language becomes more and more important. If you understand language, and if you can analyze language, you learn a lot. If we were to do a clever algorithmic search of everything that we do, every report, every review, every paper, every interview, every program, and you did a word map of that. From 2001, 9/11, until about 2010, let's say 2011, March 11th, 2011, Hurricane Katrina, the word that you would see in the center of that word map is crisis. Everything was crisis. 9/11, crisis. 2005, Hurricane Katrina, crisis. 2008, global financial collapse, crisis. 2010, BP Deepwater Horizon, crisis. 2011, Fukushima, crisis. Everything was crisis. And then suddenly, in 2011, a new word came up, a new word. And that new word was resilience. And suddenly, everybody was talking about resilience. Resilience organizations, resilience societies, resilient structures, personal resilience, emotional resilience, everything was resilience. And suddenly everybody became a expert in how do we create resilience. And then in 2017, if you do this word map, a new word appeared from absolutely nowhere. It didn't grow up, it just went bang. And it took over, it dominated your word map. And in 2017, the word that dominated was unprecedented. Unprecedented. Suddenly, everything is unprecedented. Unprecedented climate change, unprecedented global warming, unprecedented data theft, unprecedented infrastructure failure, unprecedented flooding, unprecedented temperatures, unprecedented forest fires. Everything was unprecedented. And that's interesting. Because if you use the word unprecedented to describe the situation you're describing, what it means is we do not know what is going on. That is what unprecedented means. We do not know what is going on. If you look at risk management, if you look at standard risk management, whether it's insurance or whether it's any other aspect of risk management, there is a basic, fundamental, underlying, foundational belief behind risk management. And that is risk is rational. There is a rationality to risk management. There's laws, just like there's laws of physics and laws of engineering, there are laws of risk. And the basic, fundamental, underlying law of risk management is that I can observe the past, I can create a model of the future, and I can create a model of the present, and I can project into the future. There is a continuum, there is a line, there is a connectivity between what was, what is, and what will be. And that allows me to have a rational understanding of what I'm projecting forward. Now, there is always change, and there has been change throughout history. But nevertheless, there is a rationality and a connection between what was, what is, what will be, and that allows me to build a rational model of risk which I can then engage with. There are rules to it. It's not random. And so it seems to me that if we're going to be talking about strategic risk and crisis management 2022 to 2025, there is a fundamental question we have to ask ourselves today on the 16th of November 2022. Because I will tell you one thing for sure. Risk and crisis management 2022 is not the same as risk and crisis management 2015. Absolutely. And if anybody thinks that you can use the language and the models and the frameworks and the theories of risk management 2015 to describe the risk environment of 2025, then as the Americans say, you've missed the memo, okay? You've missed the message. And so if we accept that change is universal, it is part of the universe we live in, then if we look at the changes in strategic risk and crisis management, I think there are three options. The change can be evolutionary. It can be a natural evolution. There's always change. There's change from rural to urban, from urban to industrial, industrial to digital, digital to cyber. And there's always been people who've lost out. If you went from, if you were driving a tractor with a horse and somebody comes along with a tractor with an engine, then you lose out. There's always been people who've lost out. So the question is the change that we are seeing evolutionary? Is it a natural part of the change that the universe has gone through? In the 14th century, in the Black Death, Europe lost over 50% of its population. Over 50% of the population died. And it must have seemed at the time that it was the end of the world. It was the end of the world. There was no future in the world. We look at COVID, for example, as the crisis management we're involved in right now. And we think that COVID is the Black Death of our time. But COVID is only a really very mid-level pandemic. I mean, it's not a serious pandemic in any means whatsoever. If you look at Ebola, for example, Ebola, which was in Africa 2013 to 2015 and is now coming back, Ebola has a death rate of 50%. 50% of people who get Ebola die. In COVID, it's less than 1%. So imagine you had the numbers of infections of COVID with a 50% or a 30% or a 40% death rate. That would have been a pandemic. That would have been a crisis. We'll come back to that later. So basically speaking, the question is it evolutionary? Or is it revolutionary? Are the changes that we're seeing so radical and fundamental that there is a revolutionary change in what we're seeing? Are we seeing a collapse of the forms and a build-up of something else? Just like, for example, in 1991, which I know that for many of you, actually pretty well all of you, is ancient history. Let me tell you, for us, 1991 is very recent history. For a lot of you, it's ancient history. But 1991 was a revolution. But what a revolution does, it still maintains the same fundamental building blocks. Okay, you just knock it down and you rebuild using the same building blocks. Or there's a third option. So evolutionary change, revolutionary change, revolutionary change, and the third option is it mutational? Is it mutating? Is the world we're living in right now today mutating? And if it's mutating, what that means is that there is a species jump, that is a break. That continuum, that rational continuum breaks. And to put it into another language, to put it into another phrasing, the question is, are we seeing a paradigm shift? And academics love the word paradigm shift. It's one of their favorite things. So are we seeing a paradigm shift between risk management in the world and the universe 2015 and 2025? One of the signs that you are actually going through a paradigm shift is that the language that you used to describe the past doesn't describe the present. You cannot use the language of a typewriter to describe the internet. It doesn't work. If you look at a motor car of 1923, 100 years ago, a motor car engine of 1923, and a motor car engine of 1990, they were pretty much the same. You open up the bonnet, and somebody who understood a motor car engine in 1923 would have understood a motor car engine in 1990. It looks the same, it works the same, they can work it out. Now, in 2020, that's computer chips. That's a computer chip. That car is run by computer chips, not by bits of metals which you can take a screwdriver to and bang something, or a spanner. It's computer chips. There is a paradigm shift. And so if we are talking about a paradigm shift, then we have to understand that the language that we use to describe risk in 2015 does not work in 2022 to 25. Now, that is an argument, that is an academic argument, and people bring their own opinions, and some people think this and some people think that. I personally believe that yes, we are going through a paradigm shift. We're going through a paradigm shift. You may disagree, and other people do disagree. But if we are going through a paradigm shift, then the question is, what can we bring with us to give us the language to describe this new world we're living in? Because the first thing is you need a language. You need a language to articulate and conceptualize. And if you can't have the language to describe it, then you can't start. And it seems to me that if we look at our leaders, our political leaders and our economic leaders and our corporate leaders and everybody else, they do not have the language to describe risk in 2023. They are still using the traditional languages of 2015. And it seems to me that if we are to describe this risk environment in a way that makes sense and allows us to engage with it, there's multiple ways that you can describe that. But from our perspective, there are three pillars that we think, okay, we have to engage with this. The first pillar is complexity. We have to understand that the jungle we are living in is complexity. The world is a complex place. The systems we're dependent on is a complex system. The frameworks and the networks are all complex. And the truth of the matter is, nobody knows how they work. Nobody knows how they work. If you do risk management and you go into an organization and you do a review and you say, okay, well, how good are you at risk management? The first question you ask about any problem is, who owns the problem? Who owns the problem? And if in the organization they say, we don't know, then you have a trouble. The problem is not the problem. The problem is that the organization doesn't know who owns the problem. And yet, if we look at the risk environment that we're operating in now on a global level, who owns the problem? Nobody. Who owns it? Who owns the financial systems? Nobody. Who owns the data systems? Nobody. Who owns the satellite systems? Nobody. And so, from the beginning, we have this problem, okay, well, who owns the damn thing? The answer is we don't know. So the first thing is complexity. We absolutely have to have a language and a framework which allows us to understand complexity. The second one is, as I've mentioned, unprecedented. That we are now seeing risks and challenges come up which are unprecedented. They're not attached to or a continuation of what we saw in 2015. They are different. So we're now seeing, for example, in centigrade, 60-degree heat, 130-degree Fahrenheit. Now, I was in the Middle East 25 years ago, and I think in 1998 I wrote a paper, and I said, and at that time, 42 degrees was hot. 42 degrees was hot in the Middle East. And I wrote a paper saying, I thought that 48 degrees was the limit of human capacity. That after 48 degrees, we cannot live above that. Now 55 degrees is normal, just completely normal. I mean, in the Middle East, absolutely normal, 55 degrees. In Algeria last year, they had 60 degrees, and it's going to go up. What does that mean? What does that mean? The answer is nobody knows. There is no city in the world right now that trusts its own water system. There is not enough water. We can't provide water. We can't deliver water. We can't keep it clean. We can't keep it secure. What does a city without water look like? Now. Kiev goes without water. We have bottled water maybe for 1 day, 2 days, but what does that mean? And the answer is, nobody knows. That's the answer. Anybody who says, I know what that means, they're either stupid or they're lying, because nobody knows. So 1 is complexity, 2 is unprecedented, and the third pillar is non-recoverable. We cannot recover. We can't recover. We can't go back to what was. So, for example, we can't recover from climate change. We can't recover from COVID. We have to recover forward into the new reality. Now, my friends, every single one of you is going to be part of that in Ukraine. I mean, I am here. The reason I'm here now is because I'm talking with ministries within Ukraine. And they are very, very clear. We do not want to recover. We do not want to recover. We want to transform. We want to transform. This is an opportunity to create transformational change, not to go back to what we was. And you, every one of you, if you wish to be so, can be part of that conversation and make a contribution to that. But if we look at the world we live in, we cannot recover to 2015. We have to think about what does moving forward mean. I read something very interesting on the internet. I like the internet. But somebody said Elon Musk, okay, is spending billions and billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars to try and work out how do we live on Mars. He should be trying to work out how we live on Earth. That's the question. How do we live on Earth 2030 to 2050? Now, some people in this room will tell you, I'm sure that to you 10 years seems a lot. So some of us, 10 years goes like that. It just goes snap, bang, 10 years, poof, gone. 2030 is not far away, let me tell you. What is the world we're living in? I don't know. The problems do not exist yet. So I think we take those 3 pillars, complexity, unprecedentedness, and non-recoverability, and say, okay, what does that mean with the environment? And what's nice is we can come back into the academic world. Because the academic world has to be part of that discussion. Now, the reason I set up the Institute of Strategic Risk Management was because I did my doctorate in strategic risk and crisis management within hyper-complex crisis environments. And when I did my doctorate, I thought, right, okay, let's go and talk to people. And I realized that nobody understood this stuff. Nobody. Not governments, not the World Bank, not the World Health Organization, not the European Union, anybody. And so what we need to do now is we need to bring the academics into play. Now, having an understanding, because all of those people out there making decisions have absolutely no awareness of the fantastic and rich academic work that's been created and which is available. There, it's available. Google search, Google Scholar, it's there. But a recognition and an understanding and a familiarity with the academic work around strategic risk and crisis management does not give you answers. It does not solve your problems. But what it does do, it gives you a framework to discuss complex issues. It gives you a framework to discuss, it gives you a language, it gives you a conceptualization to discuss these things. And if you do not have that academic discipline and framework and structure, and you try and discuss these things, then the Chinese have a phrase, a dog chasing flies. Okay? A dog, and what it means is it has no pattern, it has no shape. Dog chasing flies, no shape, no pattern, and in the end, no flies either. And if you look at the way that our leaders discuss these matters, which are significant matters, they're like dogs chasing flies. Every week it changes, something else, something else, something else. And so what we need to do as academics is bring a structure to the program that allows that to have rationality, allows us to discuss it in a meaningful way. And I would like to talk, because we are in an academic setting, I would like to talk about two academic approaches that for me are incredibly valuable. And I think hopefully are valuable to you. And if you know about these people, fantastic. If you don't, then this will be an introduction to two of the leading thinkers in academic strategic risk and crisis management. The first is Rittel and Weber's 1973 paper on wicked problems. So we talk about wicked problems. What does wicked problems mean? Wicked problems are not evil. It's not wicked in bad. It's wicked as in non-rational problems. And one of the problems about a non-rational problem is you can't define it. How do you define the problem of poverty? How do you define the problem of immigration? 5 different people will define it in completely different ways. How do you define the problem of drug abuse, for example, or education resourcing? And the problem is we can't define the problem. But Rittel and Weber brought 10 concepts, 10 principles of wicked problems. And it's a short, and if you go into the ISRM library, we have it there, it's open access, you're welcome to go there. But they had 9 principles of wicked problems. Sorry, 10 principles of wicked problems. And the first 9 are technical. So for example, you cannot describe a wicked problem. If you describe it, then it's not a wicked problem, it's a rational problem. The other principle, for example, is you can't have an experiment. You can't try and then come back and try something else and then come back and try something else. If in COVID, which was a wicked problem, you say, we're going to go into lockdown, you can't say after 6 weeks, no, that didn't work, let's come back, let's try not lockdown. That decision you make creates the new reality you have to live in. So everything that you do creates the new reality. And of course, usually in scientific work, we experiment, then we come back, then we experiment, then we come back, then we experiment. That doesn't work in a wicked problem. If you say, we are going to fund this generation of education in this ways, you can't come back 2 years later and say, no, let's try something else. That's created a new reality. But what's interesting is that there are 9 principles of wicked problems which are technical. But the 10th principle of wicked problems is the simplest. And the 10th principle of wicked problems quite simply says, the planner has no right to be wrong. The planner has no right to be wrong. Why? Because being wrong has consequences. In the UK, in 2017, the UK government published quite openly its UK's National Risk Register. Open. And on the top right-hand, you always look at the top, when you look at a risk register, you always look at the top right-hand corner. That's a nasty bit. So the first thing is you look at the top right-hand corner, and what is there? Pandemic influenza. Every year we have pandemic influenza. It's part of the world we live in, and every year it puts our systems and our societies under pressure. And what is just underneath that? Emergent infectious diseases. That is pandemic. And on the likelihood axis, that was the same as pandemic influenza, 4 out of 5 over the next 5 years, which means it's actually going to happen. But the impact was slightly lower. So if we're thinking about our risk register, which is always a starting position, the risk register is always your first document. What do we need to think about? It's your list. What do we need to think about? And when something happens, when something bad happens, there are always 2 questions. The first question is it on your risk register? I mean, is it on your risk register? Yes, pandemic, emergent infectious diseases is on the risk register. Well done. And the second question is, do you understand what it means? Do you understand what that means? And the UK government put on their 2017 openly published National Risk Register, pandemic, emergent infectious diseases. And then they did an assessment of what the impact would be. And the impact that the UK government thought they would have from an emergent infectious disease like coronavirus was 150 dead people. 150, not 150,000, 150. We've had over 180,000 dead people in the UK. So clearly, if you think you're going to have 150 people, and then you've got 200 people, and then 700 people, and you've got 1,000 people, oh my God, then 4,000 people, then 12,000 people, then 30,000 people, then you say, when's it going to stop? 60,000 people, and 90,000 people, 120,000, when's it going to stop? And that is where it becomes irrational, non-rational, because if you have a plan for 150 dead people, and now you have 180,000 dead people, clearly that doesn't work over that. So the truth of the matter is that we have to ask ourselves a question. How do we turn non-rational problems into rational problems? Because as soon as we turn them from non-rational problems into rational problems, now we can engage with them. Now we have some leverage. We can wrestle with them. You can't wrestle with a cloud. You give a cloud. You can wrestle with an octopus if you have to, but you can't wrestle with a cloud. You've got to give it some physicality. And so the question that we are struggling with genuinely is, how do we turn these non-rational problems of climate change or global warming or resource depletion or whatever it might be, or pandemics, into rational problems? And the thing about a rational problem is, A, you can describe it. B, you can offer a range of options. You have option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4. C, you then have a decision, what are the criteria for judging which option we wish to take? So for example, we have coronavirus. We have 60,000 dead people. Do we close down society, completely close it down, like they did in China, for example, or in New Zealand? Or do we keep our society open, like they did, for example, in Japan and they did in Sweden? Now, those are 2 opposite and conflicting options. And the truth of the matter is, when you say which one's correct, the answer is, well, nobody knows. That is, if you know which one's correct, then there's no problem. So when we are trying to create a rational understanding of irrational problems, we're not talking about, is it right or wrong? It's impossible to know whether locking down is right or wrong. It is impossible to know whether building a new road is right or wrong. You have to wait 20 years to find that out. It's not even, is it good or bad? When you're discussing an irrational, wicked problem, the only question is, what you're discussing, is it useful? Is it useful or is it not useful? Does it allow you to understand things better? Does it give you a framework for discussion? And so let's take COVID-19. Let's take this thing that changed the world. If if 9/11, September 11th, 2001, was the start of modern strategic risk and crisis management, then we can say the 1st of March 2020 was the beginning of this next phase, which was basically the beginning of COVID. It started coming out of Wuhan in China in November, December 2019, but on the 1st of March 2020, we started taking it seriously. And so the question is, if we take that as a model of a complex risk, of an irrational risk, does it give us a framework to understand how we can engage with that? And the answer, I'm glad to say, is yes, it does. It gives us a lot. If we look at the countries of Europe, which are supposed to be good at this stuff, their basic response to COVID-19 was to completely and utterly ignore it. Just ignore it. That's it. It will go away. Forget about it. But if we look at the countries of Southeast Asia that had been through SARS, a pandemic, a coronavirus pandemic in 2003, and that's basically Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and South Korea. Because those 4 countries had been through a pandemic before, when coronavirus came up in November, December 2019, they paid attention to it. They said, okay, this is interesting. Let's have a chat. I mean, 2003 was only 16 years ago. There's plenty of people around. We've still got the policy papers, we've got the decision makers, we've got the academics, we've got the health people. And so what they did was, they brought people together and they started discussing it. And that demonstrates COVID was the same. COVID was the same. But because these people had recognized it, they had de-escalated it from a non-rational, wicked problem to a rational major incident. And then they had capabilities to discuss it. How do we do that? We go back to the academic work. And we look at the work of somebody called Gary Klein. And Gary Klein did work called Recognition Primed Decision Making, RPDM, Recognition Primed Decision Making. And what Recognition Primed Decision Making says, if you are working in a stable environment, then you need standard operational procedures. You need processes and protocols because it is stable. It is same yesterday, same today, same tomorrow. These are the procedures. And what you want to create is efficiency. Efficiency is doing the same thing time after time in a stable environment. But if you're in a non-stable environment, an unstable environment, a chaotic environment, then efficiency doesn't work because you have to adapt to it and change to it all the time. And what Gary Klein said was, if we are looking at a situation which is unfamiliar to us, the way that we create sense, we make sense about it, is we compare it not to what the textbook says, but to our own memories, our own memories. And you go, it looks like one of those. It's a bit like that. How many here, is anybody here the third child? Is anybody here the third child? So you've got 2 older brothers or sisters. Put your hands up if you're the third child. Nobody here the third child? Nobody? You're the third child. Anybody else the third child? Anybody else got 3 children? You haven't got 3 children. You might have 3 children. If you are the third child, what I'm about to say now might have an emotional impact. Okay, so I have to give you warning. Because what happens is if you're the third child, you'll recognize this. If you are a young parent, you'll understand this, and you have your beautiful firstborn daughter or son who you love more than life itself. And then this baby is like 2 years old. At night time, the baby goes, cough, cough, cough. And you go, oh my God, the baby's coughing. Oh my God, get the car, get the bag, call the hospital, get the doctor. No. You understand? I saw you recognize this. Fine, good. 2 years later, baby number 2 comes along, beautiful, beautiful baby. And baby number 2 is 2 years old and goes, cough, cough. And you go, oh, darling, you got a cough here, sweetheart? Have a biscuit. Baby number 3 comes along, your beautiful baby, 2 years old, and goes, cough, cough. You go, what do you want? Go, leave me alone. Just leave me alone. Somebody take this kid away from me. Seriously. You recognize the picture, yes? That is recognition prime decision making. That's because you recognize it. You're building a picture. It makes sense to you. You're making judgments. That's RPDM in action. And you can't buy that. You can't say to somebody, I'll give you $1 million. Let me have the experience of my third kid. You've got to live through it. And that's true for crisis management. There is nothing that you can do, nothing that you get right the first time. There is nothing in this universe that you get right the first time. I can show you how to bake a cake. I can explain to you how to bake a cake. I can give you instructions for baking a cake. I can show you a video of baking a cake. We better bake a cake. No, you can't. You still can't bake a cake. Because you have to go, oh wait, it didn't make sense. How many times you're on the internet and you're trying to register for something? How many times do you get it right the first time? Never. There's always something you miss or something you didn't put in. Second time, third time, you get it right, because that's recognition prime decision making. But if there is nothing in this universe we get right the first time, how the hell do we expect to get crisis management right the first time? We can't. So if we have a responsibility as a community to say, okay, we know how to do this stuff, what we need to do is to have a way of downgrading crisis management. We don't do crisis management, we downgrade crisis management to a rational major incident, just like the countries in Southeast Europe did. How do we do that? That's the next lecture. That's the next lecture. But that is basically an overview of some of the things that I'm involved in. We work with universities all over the world. I hope that we have an opportunity to have a relationship with this university. But I'll just give you something before we leave. And I want to come back to this word resilience. Because it is something that is fundamental to the world we live in. How do we create resilience? Personal resilience, individual resilience, societal resilience, organizational resilience, etc., etc. There's a number of things you need to have. First of all, you have to have a sensitivity to your changing environment. Resilience is always about two things, change and stress. If you don't have change, if things are stable, you don't need resilience. And if you go from the cold outside rainy weather into a nice warm house, you don't need resilience. When you go from the nice warm house outside, then you need resilience. So there's always two things, change and stress. And the question is, well, how sensitive are we to change and stress? Because the earlier we're sensitive to change and stress, then the earlier we can deal with things. And we keep pushing things off. The second thing is spare capacity. You have to have spare capacity. If you don't have spare capacity, then everything becomes basically significant failure points, single points of failure. But if you were to say to me, what is the most significant value in allowing an organization to become resilient, it is very simply this, the ability to learn. If you want to have resilient societies, if you want to have resilient organizations, you have to inbuild deep learning, fast learning into what you're doing. Because that allows you to learn how to become better. People think resilience is what happens after an event happens. After an event happens, are we resilient? That's not resilience, that's survival. If you want to have resilience, you have to pay ahead. You have to pay ahead. You have to become the organization. You don't become fit the day before the football match. You don't learn to dance the day before the ball. You've got to live your life. And being fit is not about just going to the gym. That's being strong. But being fit and being healthy, you've got to live your lifestyle in a way that allows you to do that. And that's true with resilience as well. And so I hope that what I've discussed today, what I've shared with you today, it's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It is useful or it's not useful. Does it allow you to have the feeling that maybe things make a bit more sense now than they did an hour ago? And if so, that's great. I'd like to thank Igor. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Melnichenko. I'd like to thank him. Anatoly, he's not here. I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity. And I hope that this is just the start of a relationship. I hope you have a chance to see each other again. Thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, dear students,
or mutation?
That's a brilliant question. I'm very lucky. As you know, the invasion took place on the 24th of February. On the 1st of June, the Ukrainian government got in touch with me and said, David, we need to have a chat. So within 1 week, I was involved in conversations. And I've been involved ever since. I was here in June with the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, so at the very, very highest strategic level. I think what there is here is, and I'm only repeating what I've heard at the very highest level of Ukrainian government, absolutely this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to be mutational, to be, the word is transformational. It's not to recover, it is to be transformational. And I'm really feel very privileged and honored to be part of that conversation. But one of the reasons why I think that there is an opportunity to be transformational, and I genuinely think there is because I do this stuff all over the world. But what we're now talking about is post-conflict recovery and reconstruction. Okay? Post-conflict recovery and reconstruction. And usually, if you look at post-conflict recovery and reconstruction, you're looking at failed states. Look at Somalia, for example. Syria, for example. Now, if I was to go to Somalia to discuss these issues, the first 18 months, the problem is, who do you talk to? Because there's nobody there. But in Ukraine, it's absolutely not a failed state. Ukraine is a fantastically successful state that wants to do transformation. And we are talking about it, when we're talking with the government agencies, we're looking at that from 3 pillars. The first is business. You've got to have business. You've got to have people working. The second is economy. You've got to create an economy that is future-looking, further-looking. But the third, absolutely, is education and the young people. That's it. That's the pillar. The education and the young people. Now we are hosting in December a symposium in the UK, a Ukraine symposium. And that has 3 pillars: research, education, research and development, technology, and innovation entrepreneurship. And the people in the UK are incredibly excited about the opportunities there are from creating that connections in Ukraine. So I think absolutely the opportunity is there to be transformational. And if you wish to do so, then there is, again, structure and methodology to allow that to happen. We shall see in 20 years' time. But everything is possible. But to have transformation, it's not necessary to have leadership. You need sustained leadership. Structural transformation is 2 generations, at least 2 generations. One generation to change, and the next generation says, okay, this is how we do it. It becomes normal for them. Because even if you change things, the pressure is always to come back again. It's always to come back. Now, we have examples of countries and societies and economies which have changed. 2 of those are Estonia and Ireland. 25 years ago, Ireland was an agricultural community, agricultural economy, where all the kids, young people left. Now it is our financial technology leading in the world, and all the kids are coming back. So it can be done. You are going to be part of that conversation. Thank you. Thank you. Great question. Thank you. Thank you.
So I have an opinion. I think that we can please not only work in our situation to really fight with climate change. At least is about making profit, about using, exploiting, and sometimes destroying resources to make profit. And it is very dangerous to our environment.
What's your name?
My name is Paul.
Paul. Thank you, Paul. Interesting theory, Paul. Interesting theory. Great question. The thing about it is change is always difficult. Change is always difficult. People, I have the same mobile phone for the last 10 years because I don't want to change it. You know, people don't want to change. People will use the same toothpaste. They will walk to work exactly the same way. People don't like change. So if you do want change, you have to do it in a way that becomes acceptable and reasonable to those people and brings benefit. The first rule of organizational change is you never want radical change. Anybody who suggests radical change should be told to leave the room. What you want is incremental change that has a radical impact. That's not the same thing. So you don't want radical change, you want improvement. You build on what is and then you improve it. I think that we're very close to going through some radical changes. The first thing is you have to change people, Schumann's behavior. Humankind, 6 billion people, almost 7 billion people, you have to change behavior. For example, in our house, we hardly eat meat now. We hardly eat meat. I don't know why, but it's not. If I go out now to a restaurant, there's steak and then there's veg. I will take the vegetarian. I'm not a vegetarian, but it's something that we do. I don't have a car, for example. So I think that you have to change people's behaviors, and that's very difficult. But you look at smoking, for example. Smoking was acceptable, then smoking was not acceptable. Using children to work 150 years ago was acceptable, then it was not acceptable. My feeling is that actually we're very close to having a change. If you look at everything that's happened over the last 20 years, the single word that describes it is disruptive. You know, we have disruptive economies, we have disruptive communication, disruptive financing. We haven't had disruptive governance yet. We still have the same way of governance. My feeling is that we might be seeing disruptive governance. My fear is that would involve President Trump coming back, which would be very disruptive, but not necessarily in a good way. But these are the challenges we have to face. But to go back 70 years, no, not 70 years, 50 years to 1970, there was a philosopher called Marshall McLuhan who was talking about Gaia and this universe, the world as a living ecosphere. And he said, think global, act local. Act local. Be a good neighbor. Do the right thing where you are. And my feeling is that that can be transformational. I hope so. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Hi. So, Greg, so I'm part of the UK National Preparedness Commission, which says in the UK, how do we get ready for this stuff? And we have what's called a Black Sky, Black Start program. So Black Sky basically means total national power outage. No power, nothing, for 3 weeks. And the question is, what does that mean? And the answer is, nobody knows. I mean, nobody has any idea. So we're trying to work out what that means and how we can create structures and frameworks. And what we are understanding very much is that you can't, to answer that question, you don't try and solve that problem. What you do is you look at the underlying capabilities that are necessary. So you look at things like communication, integration. But the single most significant lesson we've learned from COVID and from everything else is that you have to have ownership at the community level. When the structures collapse, it comes down, it's community and it's you and it's me and it's the people in this room, how do we get on with it? So in 2005, Hurricane Katrina came along. And so in 2001 you had 9/11 and you set up FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and in 2005 Hurricane Katrina came along and that was FEMA's opportunity to do something, move forward and make things happen. And they failed absolutely on every level, and they just realized we didn't understand it, we weren't ready. And they thought about it, and they changed their doctrine. They said, we got it wrong, we misunderstood. We thought our job was to do crisis management, that FEMA's job was to do crisis management. It's not. FEMA's job is to support communities doing crisis management. So if you're looking for the fundamental underlying issues you've got to look at community ownership and community engagement. And then once you understand that and accept that, then there are structures and methodologies to do that. But that's the approach we're taking in the UK. And I think those are lessons which are valid for everybody. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Oleg. Thank you very much.
We see so a lot of young people here.
Thank you.
And I hope that we will continue our relationship of our organizations, and we will continue our relationship in the future.
I look forward to it
Thank
very, very much. Thank you, Oleg.
very much.
And thank you to everybody. Thank you. Good. Good? Thank you.